Hey everybody, this is herculespetix, founder, curator, docent, and gift shop employee of the herculespetix Academy of Comic Book Studies. Tonight we're going to look at Superman's girlfriend Lois Lane, number 68. This is an 80-page giant, which back in the 60s and 70s meant it's a lot of reprints. It's a nice fat issue. It's even got a spine. Well, it's a really bad copy. As you can see, I need an upgrade of this. But who cares? I can read all the comics. I don't give a shit if it's in mint condition. But I wouldn't mind a copy where the cover isn't half ripped off. So, number 68 is 1966. Most of the stories seem to be reprinted from like 1960, 1961. Back then, they figured most kids age out of comics after 5 years. They're, 8 or 9. By the time they're 13, 14, they're interested in girls and cars. They were probably right, especially with this kind of crazy shit that they were putting out. Yeah, most 13-year-olds would be like, this is ridiculous. But, so they did this all the time, 80-page giants. But, someone like me today who bought this very cheap, that's why it looks like this. That's why it's a piece of shit. I think I paid $1 for this. But man, this is some fun reading. It's ludicrous and inane, but it's fucking fun as hell. So this special issue is dedicated to Lois's romances. All the various stories she's had where she falls in love with someone other than Superman. Actually, it's a contents page. That was very rare in comics, even now. But these 80-page giants were a little different. I'm sorry, guys, I forgot to mention. This cover is by Schaffenberger. And I gotta say, after reading this issue, there's a lot of Schaffenberger in here. I have a new appreciation for this guy. I always knew he was pretty okay, whatever. But man, I like his cartooning a lot. Unfortunately, this is not his cartooning. This is Curt Swan. And let me punch this up. I had this all laid out on my iPad here. And this is inked by, sorry, give me a second. Inked by Stan K, who I'm not familiar with. Suffice to say, it looks like Curt Swan art. It doesn't really matter who inks Curt Swan. Unless it would, I don't know, in the 80s, if he was ever inked by Klaus Janson or something, that would be something. I don't know if I'd like it, but it's written by Jerry Siegel, the creator of Superman. So we have Superman's rival, Mental Man. And so, very typical for Curt Swan art, at the very basic definition of the word perfunctory. I hope I'm not offending anyone, but I never liked Curt Swan's art. I think it's very dull. But, whatever. Kids didn't give a shit. They were buying Superman because they saw the TV show and they liked Superman. So it didn't matter. But he's kind of revered as the guy who did more Superman stories than anyone. It was like 4 decades, I think, he drew Superman. Gotta be honest, never liked his shit at all. Sorry. I'm not really sorry. So, we start off the story. Perry White's looking at the circulation numbers of the Daily Planet. He's like, we need a new feature. We gotta boost sales. Lois reveals to him that she was quite the artist in college. She was pretty good. She's like, I'm gonna do a comic strip. I think this might get our numbers up. She looks pretty good. In fact, she draws just like Curt Swan, surprisingly enough. We actually see the comic strip. I kind of like this, how you see her comic strip. She makes a comic strip about a superhero named Mental Man. And Clark Kent's reviewing her work. We realize it's almost like a wish fulfillment comic. Like, Mental Man is this awesome dude. He's handsome. He's maybe stronger than Superman. And there's a character in the strip called Laura Lovely, who is actually, it's obviously her. It's Lois Lane. And unlike Superman, Mental Man adores Laura Lovely and showers her with affection. So it's like this kind of sad... If you've read Lois Lane, her pathetic love of Superman, which is never reciprocated, it's kind of this sad thing like, oh, I'm going to make this comic strip where all my dreams come true, whatever. There's some super-powered, awesome, handsome guy who loves me. So the strip becomes very popular. It's syndicated throughout the country. Here we see another example. And then one day, Mental Man actually appears. He materializes in human form. He claims that the concentration of millions of my fans throughout the country has materialized me. Which is like, okay, so how come, like Alley-Oop isn't walking around? Alley-Oop had more readers than you. Where's Little Orphan Annie? If that's all it takes to materialize from a comic strip. They don't explain that, though. So, he actually says, I just came here because I want to meet my creator. But just seeing you, I'm in love with you. And she says, of course, I'm in love with Superman. And he says, forget him. I want to marry you immediately. And then I guess he shows off his powers. And he with his mental powers, he makes a safe, rise off the ground. Superman happens to fly in right then. And he's even shocked. He's like, hey, I thought you were just a comic strip character. What the hell's going on? And then this is the lamest test of his powers. He says, look at that electric company building. There's a giant light bulb on top. I'm going to make it turn on with my mental powers. And he does. So Lois is still, she loves Superman. But she's thinking to herself, she's like, Superman's avoided proposing to me for years. Maybe I'll make him jealous by pretending I like Mental Man. So she kind of dangles a little hope in front of Mental Man. And Superman seems a little peeved. Lois is like, ooh, I think it's working. Superman seems like he's a little annoyed by this. So then Mental Man takes Lois on a date. They go on a ferry. And this whale shows up out of nowhere. He's going to ram the ship. I don't think that's ever happened in the history of whales. I don't know if whales have ever rammed a ship. But it happens here. And Mental Man uses amazing powers to, make the whale change its course. The next day, they're on another date. This piano is about to fall on Mental Man and Lois. But using his mental powers, he makes it return to the roof. Superman shows up. He's going to save them. But Mental Man basically says, don't bother, Superman. I'll save my girlfriend myself if you don't mind. And Superman flies off like, aww. And Lois thinks, Superman's flying off looking jealous and hurt. Serves him right. And he says, please, Lois, don't delay any longer. Marry me. And she's still stringing him along. She's like, I need time to think it over. But then this dude shows up, this kind of gangster type dude. He says, listen, we want to talk to you. Show up here at this place tomorrow. So it's this gangster's hideout. And he busts through the floor to show his prowess. And they said, wow, you really are something. This was almost like a test. The fact that you didn't need to knock on the door and walk in. Here's something else. It's so dumb. It doesn't make any sense. They didn't say, hey, you have to break into our hideout. But he does. He breaks into the floor for, I don't know why, but it impresses the gangster. And he says, listen, we want to pull an armored car job, and we want you to help us. If you do, we'll tell you a surefire way to get Lois to marry you. And so they basically, quid pro quo, they say, hey, you don't know this, but Superman can be killed by kryptonite. If you knock off Superman, she'll probably marry you. You'll be the only game in town. But then you got to help us with this job. So the next day, Superman shows up at the roof of the Daily Planet. They got that big globe on top. And Mental Man's there, waiting. He says, "Oh, Mental Man, glad to see you." And he says, "You won't be for long." And he says, "Globe, change to kryptonite." And it does. And Superman's like, "Oh, you're killing me." So then, okay, this is where it just gets nuts. Mental Man lifts up Superman and flies him off to try to take him to a hospital. He's got kryptonite poisoning. For some reason, he doesn't fly to the hospital. He flies to this dock and puts Superman on this giant barge and then swims carrying the barge. He's towing the barge by himself. And then he gets to the hospital. Now, why didn't he just fly him to the hospital? I don't know. Because Jerry Siegel's a shitty writer. This is insane. So he finally gets him to the hospital. He's green, if you can see. Superman's green. And Mental Man, pretends that he's concerned. He says, "I better break this to Lois Lane." So he tells Lois. She's like crying. And then he's just like, "Yeah, Lois, sorry he's dead. But let me fill the gap in your heart." So he's like hitting on her in her sorrow. So Mental Man's a turd, we realize. So finally it comes time to pay the piper, and the gangsters say, "Okay, we held up our end. You gotta help us rob this armored car." Mental Man does. He lifts it over his head, kind of breaks it up so all the money spills out. And then the cops show up. Turns out Mental Man was in on the deal. He was like, "You've caught them red-handed, officers. Take them away. They're all yours." And the gangster, of course, is like, "You double-crossing rat. You tricked us." But the gangster figures, okay, I can get a little revenge. He says, "Hey, Lois Lane, Mental Man killed Superman, just so you know." But then we see a word balloon. "That isn't true, Lois." And Superman shows up. So, oh my God, guys. I've showed you these Mort Weisinger comics before. They always have these insanely convoluted explanations for these ludicrous situations. This one takes the cake. Okay, I can't say that because they're all pretty fucking out there. But Superman shows up and says, "Hey, I've been trying to get that gangster for months, years. I never could get the goods on him. So I concocted this whole plan so Mental Man could help me do this." And he laboriously, every incident since Mental Man has shown up, he explains. It's ponderous. It's fucking ponderous. And the funny thing is, okay, Superman he's a god. He has x-ray vision. He has everything he has. Oh, you couldn't have caught this guy. You couldn't have just watched him with your x-ray vision through his house or his apartment for a year. This guy's a notorious gangster. I'm sure he would have done something illegal. And you would have known because you have x-ray vision and you're basically omniscient. Or you know everything. Or you can. So now he laboriously explains everything. He's like, "Actually, he didn't materialize. It's a friend of mine pretending to be Mental Man. When he lifted the safe, it was Crypto, the dog wonder, who was inside the safe, lifting it up, supporting the safe with his body. The light bulb that went off on the General Electric building, I told the manager to turn it on at that time. The piano, it was made of balsa wood, and there was wires with a crane who had pulled it back up. I'm sorry. I think Lois would have seen a crane. It's right there. She's only 2 stories below. The armored bank job, another whatever trick. But this one, it takes the cake. Listen to this. So remember Mental Man broke through the floor of the gangster's hideout to show, like, yeah, see, I know what I'm doing. Apparently, oh my God, Superman dug the tunnel to that, and then he broke up the floorboards and lightly glued them together so it'd be easy to knock through. The whole Daily Planet globe thing's explained. It was really just green paint. And once again, how ludicrous is this? They were all alone up there. Mental Man didn't have to say this dialogue of like, ha, gotcha, Superman. Nobody was watching them. Nobody was listening to them. But yet they had this little theatrical business of like, oh no, you're killing me. I could see later on when there's people around, but nobody was there. And so Lois is trying to guess who it could be. Turns out it's Aquaman, Superman's buddy. He explains even more laboriously all the various things. Oh, when he was supposedly flying me away to the hospital, I was flying him. The barge? It was actually Aqualad and all these giant fish and sea mammals were pushing the barge. Now, at the risk of sounding like a huge nerd, I know you guys think I'm super cool and shit, but I'm a big nerd. And it's fucking Aquaman lives under the pressure of like, whatever, 17 fathoms of ocean. He's super strong. He doesn't need a bunch of fish to help him pull a barge. And also, this is the one time where like, oh yeah, Aquaman's powers, he made that whale turn away from the ship. So that makes sense. But everything else is like, Aquaman's pretty fucking strong. He doesn't need you to break up the floorboards of this, whatever, shitty apartment. I think Aquaman can break through floorboards just fine. He has like tons of ocean water pressure on him when he's at the bottom of the ocean. He's really fucking strong. Maybe this wasn't the case back then. Maybe they changed it. But it's just obvious. Yeah, Aquaman's strong. He doesn't need help pulling a barge, especially in the ocean. So Lois, of course, is just like, I was completely fooled. Like she always is. So ridiculous. And I guess Lois retires her comic. She marries off Laura Lovely to Mental Man. And that ruins the tension in the strip. So all the syndicates drop her strip. And of course she doesn't care. She's like, oh, I'm glad to be a reporter again so I can get closer to Superman. We have a little I'm sorry, before I go on to the next thing, I just want to say, guys, I know it sounds like I'm being very critical of this comic. I am. But I gotta say, these comics are fun as hell because they're so ludicrous. You have no idea what's going to happen on the next page. It's very stupid often, but it's also, these are fun as hell to read. But I just have to point out just how silly these stories were. Mort Weisinger, the editor, was obviously like, hey, what would a 7-year-old want to read? Or an 8-year-old? And all his comics are like that. But it does have this amazing readability to it. We have a little article. It's a bird, it's a plane, it's Lois Lane. There's a little recounting of all the times Lois attained superpowers. So now we have Superman's girlfriend, Lois Lane, in Lois Lane's Stone Age Suitor. This is written by Robert Bernstein. Not familiar with that guy, but he writes a lot of stories in here. And the art is by Kurt Schaffenberger. And once again, guys, this might start a flame war, if that's still a term. I gotta say, after reading this issue, not only do I really like Kurt Schaffenberger's cartooning, I can't believe that he's not considered the best Superman artist. I know he didn't work on Superman as long as Kurt Swan, but this is so much better than Kurt Swan. Everything about it. His art is just this beautiful, cartoony, yet not too cartoony. It's still serious, good superhero art. But man, it's pretty damn nice. So, Clark Kent and Lois Lane are in Mexico on an assignment. They're flying on this plane. They're about to hit this like ridge of cliffs here. And then all of a sudden a pterodactyl comes out of nowhere, attacks the plane, actually rips through it. So the plane starts to crash. Luckily, Lois Lane passes out, so Clark Kent can fly her to safety without her, knowing his secret identity. And the plane crashes, and he realizes, okay, my clothes are shredded from that, plane crash. I better hide my Superman costume in a little nook here. And then all of a sudden, these cavemen show up. So they're like in some kind of lost valley in Mexico, which I think in 1961, people would have known if there's a lost valley in Mexico at that point. There's a lot of plane travel over all of Mexico, whatever. And sorry to be such a nitpicker, but it's kind of the fun of reading these, just how dumb they are, and finding out how ridiculous they are. So, the leader of the cavemen asked Lois Lane. He says, "Speak, female, is this your mate?" And Lois Lane is such a turd that she can't help but, verbally abuse Clark. She's always verbally abusing Clark Kent. And I did want to mention this right now. There's many stories in here. I haven't read a lot of Lois Lane stories. To be honest, I have 4 issues. I have a lot of Jimmy Olsen, a lot of Superboys. But I'm just starting to buy Lois Lane stories. She's a terrible person, Lois Lane. She's horrible. Somehow she's the protagonist of this comic. But she's a grade A jerk. She sucks. So here's an example. Instead of just saying he is or he isn't, lying to him, she says, "Him? Definitely not. I'm definitely not his mate. I wouldn't marry a timid, weak-muscled jellyfish like Clark Kent." So this guy says, "Oh, great. You're not married. So you have to marry Blog. Blog is the only unmarried man in our tribe." And look how great this cartoony caricatured character is, Blog. He's just this great cartoony character. Clark's loving it. Clark is all like, oh, Lois is in for it now. I should mention that after Lois insults Clark that way, she turns to Clark and says, "No offense, Clark, but you know how I feel about Superman. Any other man is just not worthy of my attention." He's like, end the story, Lois. That's all you had to say. You didn't have to fucking insult him 4 times. Don't call him all these bad things. But, she's terrible. She's a terrible person. So, according to the laws of this tribe, any man who wants to marry a woman, though the female mate to be has a right to demand 3 requests from her potential husband. And of course, Clark is just totally sniggering, laughing to himself. He's like, "Oh God, let's see how Lois gets out of this." So the first thing she does, a dinosaur breaks into their little village. And she says, "All right, Blog, here's my first request. Stop that rampaging dinosaur all by yourself. If you run away, the marriage is off." And this guy's pretty fucking brave. Blog is really taken with Lois. He's like, "Even if I die, I'm going to do this." So everyone else runs to safety in this cave. But Blog stands his ground, and he faces the dinosaur. But Clark, because he loves this whole scenario, he's going to help Blog. Because he wants her to be in this horrible predicament where she has to marry him. So he sees that a little ways off, the Tyrannosaurus Rex's nest is there with eggs in it. So he uses his heat vision to speed along their incubation. And, Blog is just sitting there saying, "Go away." And T-Rex actually, somehow he senses that his eggs have hatched. I don't know how that works. But maybe they're not that far and she can hear it. But she runs back to her nest. And of course, everyone's like, "Oh my God, it worked. Blog scared the dinosaur away." And so then, moments later, a lightning storm breaks out and hits this tree. Now, if you guys ever saw Quest for Fire, that was something cavemen, it was a thing. They didn't know how to make fire, but if some lightning put a tree on fire, they knew that it was this precious thing, but they didn't know how to make it. So they're all fanning the tree stump, and they're like, oh, we have to keep the fire going. The next request of Lois is that they're walking by this cave, which is full of saber-toothed tigers. And she says, enter the cave of tigers. So Clark Kent, he flies in at super speed so nobody sees him. And he beats the crap out of these saber-toothed tigers. These poor innocent tigers are just sitting there in their cave. And then he knocks these stalactites down so Blog will think that they were knocked out by that. So, of course, Blog shows up and there's these unconscious tigers and he pulls one out by his tail. And everyone's like, I did it again. So, Lois is thinking about the fire earlier, and she's like, the fire went out because it starts raining. She's like, ooh, I know how to get Blog. I'm going to demand that he builds a fire, because she knows these cavemen don't know how. So Clark gives him a lighter, and he makes a fire. Lois says, oh, he must have stolen that from our plane that crashed, nearby. And then Clark finally goes into this cave and punches a hole through the wall when she's not looking to basically let them escape this, this valley. And they make it back to the real world. But then Clark uses X-ray vision and he penetrates into the lost world. He says, hey, I want to see how Blog's doing. I hope he's okay. And he's surrounded by 3 hot girls, cave girls, because his power of, fire. He's got that lighter. And Clark says, let's just hope he gets married before his lighter fluid evaporates. We have another little article about all of Lois's great scoops, her journalistic scoops. So next we have Lois Lane Gun Mall. This is written by Bill Finger, one of the main architects of Batman, and drawn by Chris Schaffenberger. So the art's nice. And this one's another zany one. So one day at the Daily Planet, this old inventor comes in. He says, I have this machine. It can make good people evil or evil people good. I'll show you. I'll use Lois Lane, your star reporter, as a subject. Lois doesn't feel anything for an hour. And then an hour later, look at the look on Lois's face. She's all sneering. She says, I'm beginning to feel different about things. Real different. Like being tired of working for small change on this crummy rag. And all of a sudden, she's talking like Edgar G. Robinson. Tired of seeing that big cigar sticking out of your kisser. I love that she shoves the cigar in Perry White's face. She goes home to her sister/roommate, Lucy Lane. And, Lucy reads about this jewelry robbery. This masked woman named the Leopard Lady apparently pulled this heist. She finds the necklace in Lois's drawer. And I don't know how she fucking recognizes this necklace from this little article picture, newspaper, black and white. It's like, oh my God, my sister Lois is the Tiger Lady. So Lois grabs her and she knocks her out with chloroform. I love this panel so much. Jimmy shows up once again to get cock-blocked by, or shunned by Lucy Lane. He's like, I have a date with Lucy. And Lois just pushes his face in. She says, scram, get lost. So now we see her as the Tiger Lady. I'm sorry, did I get that name wrong? Is it the Leopard Lady? Yes, the Leopard Lady. With her goons. She's got her own sister, Lucy Lane, tied up in a chair. And she's like, hey, this is how I am now. I'm going to get what I can while I can. No more being Mrs. Nice Lady. So Lois hatches a plan. She's like, we're going to rob the Daily Planet offices. I know where everything is, and I know where the safe is. So her and her goons go in, and they rob the safe, but then Clark Kent shows up. She bashes him in the head, knocks him out, and then Superman shows up. I guess Clark, I don't know, pretending to be... Actually, I don't know how he pulled that off, because they were looking right at him. I don't know how he sneaked away to be Superman. And Lois Lane pretends to be contrite. She says, I've just been pretending to be evil. Which makes sense in one of these Mort Reisenser stories, right? That could explain this whole zany escapade. But no, she's lying. And she opens this door to this place. It's a giant ball of kryptonite. Superman is totally, obviously weakened. And he's like, how can you do this to me? I thought you loved me. And she's like, I've changed. I can't love a goody-goody hero like you. I want a man who fits my new personality. And I've got one. It's Lex Luthor. And Superman is just... I mean, this is like a total cuckold fantasy right here going on. And Lex says that they're going to get married. And Superman's just like, oh no. Even though he's not going to marry Lois. He never will. So why does he give a fuck? So, I guess there's a big announcement. They're like bragging about it. Lois Lane and Lex Luthor take pleasure in inviting the police and the public to their wedding at City Hall. So this is a very brazen act. They're public enemies number 1 and 2. They're like, we're going to get married on the City Hall steps. And once again, this is just inane. Superman shows up. There's a huge crowd. He says to the police officer, he says, how come you haven't arrested Luthor by now? And the cop is like, do you see this crowd? I can't get through. Like, what police officer has ever been like, oh, I can't get through this crowd? No, they'd pull out their billy club and start knocking people over and get through. So apparently there's a force field around this wedding that Lex created. And look at Superman, totally watching in shock and horror as the wedding progresses. He can't stop it. He's pounding on the force field. And once they get married, Lex bursts the Force Dome, which basically blows everyone away, so nobody can stop him. So later, we see Lex Luthor and Lois Lane and his goons at this hideout, and they're all laughing. It's like, we made a fool of Superman. It's great. Superman shows up. He bursts in the door. And he uses heat vision on her. And Lois Lane is a pile of ash. It looks like he's totally killed her. But no. Lois Lane, the real Lois Lane, pops out of the door and says, is it all over? And he's like, yes, Lois, our plan worked perfectly. Lex, I know that you substituted Lois with one of your Lois robots, which you've used before. And I know that you're that scientist who came to the Daily Planet. And so you supposedly put this ray on Lois and then substituted her with a robot. So it seemed like she went evil. Still don't know how she did that. She was hanging out with Perry the whole time. They don't explain that. A lot of convoluted bullshit dialogue where it's like, okay, we get it. Okay, you know how Superman figured this out? This is so dumb. So at the wedding, when Superman was like, I'm sorry, not at the wedding, when Superman was paralyzed or stricken with the kryptonite poisoning from that big lump of kryptonite, Lex was watching. And he reached over to light Lois's cigarette. Because when you're evil, you start smoking cigarettes. That's a universal constant. And somehow he wasn't really watching Lois. So he put the lighter near her cheek. And the fact that she didn't wince from pain, Superman figured the whole thing out. Oh, it's a robot. Why would Lex Luthor do that? I mean, it's not like Superman was running at him. I guess you'd be distracted enough to, like, accidentally put your lighter in someone's cheek. But he's just calmly, well, giddily watching Superman paralyzed with the kryptonite. And he, like, put the lighter up to Lois's cheek. Oh, my God. So of course, Superman takes Luthor into custody. And I like this last gag. Lois says, would you go to a movie with me tonight? And he says, sorry, Lois. You'll have to get your marriage annulled. I never date married women. Wah, wah, wah. Another little article. Lois's strangest suitors. Which is weird because this whole issue, we're seeing that. Almost every story in here is some strange suitor for Lois. Okay, this is called Lois Lane's Super Perfume. Once again, written by Robert Bernstein, whoever the hell that is, and drawn by Kurt Schaffenberger. And so Lois Lane is in a department store. This random weirdo comes up to her, this guy, and says, hey, I own this perfume company. Would you, is it okay if I, give you a sample? This perfume is based on hieroglyphics in Cleopatra's tomb. It makes any man fall in love with you. And so Lois goes about her day. Her day's very jam-packed with journalistic enterprises. She goes to a movie set, and she's supposed to interview this guy who's, I guess his Christian name is Ape Man. I think it's supposed to be Johnny Weissmuller, who plays Tarzan, who's an ape man. But that's his actual name. People in the comic call him, hey, Ape Man, time for a break. Which is very odd. So he's this big lug, pretty strapping, good-looking dude. And at first, there's no effect. Lois is like, he doesn't seem to be interested in me at all. But like a few hours later, he shows up at her apartment with all these flowers. And he said, I had the studio track you down. I want to marry you. I'm so in love with you. And then he does this thing. He says, I'm going to hold you up until you say yes. Which is not cool, right? And look, he's still holding her up. And she says, hey, man, please, if you love me, just put me down. And she explains to him. She says, thanks for proposing, Ape Man, but I can't marry you. My dream man must have brains as well as brawn. Besides, I love someone else. Please understand. Once again, Lois, no need to insult the guy and tell him that he's a moron. All you had to say was, I love someone else. But she goes to this whole thing about like, yeah, I could never be in love with a guy like a moron like you. And he's devastated, of course. Lois doesn't give a shit. The next interview she does is this famous astronomer who's never had time for marriage. He's married to his work. He's a pure scientist. She goes to interview him. No effect for like the whole hour or two she's interviewing him. But as she's leaving in her taxi, he runs out and says, I've discovered something more important than a new planet. I love you, Lois Lane. He jumps into a taxi. And once again, she explains. She says, I'm in love with Superman. I'm sorry. See, that's how you do it, Lois. She didn't say, like, you're a nerdy little wimp who I wouldn't marry anyway. Like she did with Ape Man. She just says, oh, I can't marry. I'm dedicated to Superman. I love Kurt Schaffenberger's art. That guy looks like, that could be Jaime Hernandez, I swear to God. That could be Penny Century with dark hair. So, of course, the astronomer, is just like, oh, what was me? The next interview is this rich playboy type guy, Jack Van Dyke. And once again, no effect for an hour or two. Then he gets in his dinghy and shows up at her boat and says, I have to marry you. I'll buy you anything. And once again, she says, no, I love Superman. No dice. So now she's kind of excited, though. She's like, wow, this shit works. Superman's bound to fall in love with me and propose. So now we see what's behind all this. So that guy who gave Lois the perfume in the department store, he's the owner of this perfume company. It's all a scam. He's got this guy he hired to dress up like all these three guys, 8-man, the astronomer, and the billionaire playboy, and to basically prove to Lois that this perfume works. And the whole thing is just so it's good publicity. This whole elaborate scheme is just so this guy owns this perfume company, Lois Lane will write it up in her column and say, oh my God, this perfume is amazing. So now his cohort dresses up as Superman and flies in, well, quote unquote, flies into Lois's office. I mean, he's got a string and whatever. He can't really fly. And he gets down on his knees and says, Lois, I love you. I want to marry you. And of course, Lois is over the moon. And he says, I'll marry you tomorrow. So now the perfume company owner and his little cohort, they're like, okay. They think it works. They're like somehow convinced that like, wait, this isn't just a scam. This shit really works. So we got to mass produce this shit and make millions of dollars. So they go to the scientist, I guess, who can do that. And he starts saying, he says, I threw away the photograph of the formula. I'm the only one who knows it. If you give me $1 million, I'll make the perfume for you. And then he's whipping it up in this pot at super speed. He says, watch closely. A dash of ketchup, a cup of vinegar, a pinch of sugar, some peppermint leaf, and presto. Which obviously seems silly, right? Because it's really Superman dressed as this guy. And it was all his plan to arrest these guys. And because basically his crime is you've cheated your stockholders. Once again, guys, I've talked about this with Batman comics. This is even more ludicrous. Superman has the fucking powers of a god. The whole galaxy, he could be saving people left and right. People in Papua New Guinea, some tidal wave. Oh, he's going to waste all this time to nab this guy who's cheating his stockholders. Yeah, good use of your power, Superman. Fucking idiot. It's just so insane. So he captures them. And, of course, Lois is like, I knew that was too good to be true. I mean, I got to say, Lois is pretty terrible, but she's also pretty sad. I feel for her. She's totally in love with Superman. He can never marry her because he doesn't want her to be in danger. His enemies will attack him. But she doesn't deserve Superman. And we'll see more examples. We have another little article, Lois's Landmarks. We have one of those Cap's Hobby hints by Henry Boltonoff. And this one's weird because it's not a hobby hint at all. It's just a gag cartoon, vaguely about model trains. So, guys, I always like to point these out. In the 60s, DC did these public service announcements. And they were very, super liberal and interesting. This one's called Get Hip to Old Folks. We see these two teenagers and they're kind of scoffing at this old man in their neighborhood what a loser, he's old. But then when they go to summer camp, turns out he's the volunteer counselor. Turns out he knows everything about birds and trees and naturalism. And all the kids are like, gee, Mr. Green, you know a lot. We never thought you were so cool. That's the lesson. Don't be a dick to old people. They might know something. They're not all demented and cranky and stupid. So now we have Lois Lane's Soldier Sweetheart. Once again, Robert Bernstein. And drawn by Kurt Schaffenberger. This one, okay. We totally see Lois's character here. So, one day at the Daily Planet, Lois Lane is put on the Your Career column. I guess the person who did it was vacationing. So Perry White said, you got to do the column. And look at this. This kind of pretty homely woman sends in a photo. And Lois says, here's a girl who sends her picture and asks, how could she become a model? Only by blindfolding the photographer's sister. What a fucking bitch. That's so shitty. And then she gets a letter from a soldier at a training camp. And it's a tough problem. Perry White walks in the room and says, Lois, you're not doing this anymore. I need you to go to this local army base with Clark Kent. There's a lot of whacks there. Female soldiers. And I want you to cover that, the female angle. So they both go. At lunchtime, Clark meets Lois in the mess hall. And there's this young private there. His name's Eddie Banning Jr. He makes a cake for Lois. I guess he has admired her from afar. And then he goes to get her some coffee. And then it looks like she's only 3 feet away from him. And out loud she says, ugh, if his coffee is anything like this crummy cake, I'd rather drink poison. But then, a few minutes later, when he comes up with her coffee, she kisses him on the cheek and says, I gotta give you a kiss. And he blushes. He's thrilled. So he asks her to a dance. He says, would you go to the dance with me? And Lois says, of course I would. And he does these like cartwheels in joy. He says, whoopee. I like how he's doing these cartwheels and he's knocking over all the garbage pails. So this guy is not like a prize pig. We can already tell. He doesn't look like much. He's this little shrimp. And he's also not that bright. So Clark Kent kind of scolds Lois. He's like, what's up with this, Lois? I can tell you don't give two shits about this guy. Why are you doing this? And she says, which, I mean, is kind of out of character for Lois, but she's kind of a jerk. She says, do you know who his father is? He's the famous producer, Edward Banning Sr. So I figure if I get close to him, I'll get a ton of publicity, maybe a film contract. And on top of that, make Superman jealous. And Clark is still just like disgusted. He's like, how could you do that? Play with this poor young guy's heart. And Lois keeps going on about like, what do I care? If I want something, I grab it. I'll do anything to get ahead if I want to. And Clark is just like, you really had me fooled, Lois. You're a real piece of shit. He didn't say that literally because it's a code-approved comic. And so Lois totally treats him like shit. He pulls up in his car. I'm sorry, Eddie, I should say. Eddie pulls up in his car. It's kind of dirty. It's a crappy car. It's poor. And she says, oh, that's nice, Eddie. But when we go to our date tonight, you better clean that car. I won't step inside it if you don't. So he cleans the car. Once again, Clark Kent is helping out this poor guy. And that night at the dance, Lois very obviously, purposefully spills this bowl of lemonade onto Eddie. So he's got to leave and change his clothes. And then she proceeds to dance with all the handsomest guys at the dance. Now, this is weird. She's dancing with this very good-looking guy. And she tells him, I got rid of that little runt. I hate dancing with short men. And this guy says, so that's why you set up that lemonade bowl on Eddie. What a dirty trick. I only hope the lovesick fool catches wise to you. But it's so weird. He's dancing with her. So he knows she's this horrible, scheming jerk. And yet he's dancing with her. So later that night, and, Eddie's starting to have a little misgivings. He's like, all my friends tell me you're no good for me. Is this a gag? And Lois reassures him. The whole time, Clark is like, I can't believe you're doing this, Lois. This is not like you. I never thought you could do this. So they have a date the next weekend. But Eddie can't wait. He goes AWOL from the army base. Look at this face here. That's a very unique, interesting, almost caricatured face. Kurtzman would never do that. So he goes AWOL, finds Lois in this restaurant, and she totally reassures him. She gives him a kiss on the cheek. And he actually says, "Will you marry me, Lois? I'm so in love with you." I guess there's some like TV production in a week from the army base, some kind of special. He says, "Hey, we can get married on during that televised special. It'll be very amazing, to get married on the air." And now we see Eddie back at the base. He's in trouble for going AWOL, so he's got KP duty. But then the big night comes. They have a minister, and it looks like Eddie's going to marry Lois. And then she runs off and says, "I can't go through with this wedding. I pretended to love Eddie only to make Superman jealous. Sorry, Eddie." And he finally wises up. And he says, "You are using me. You are phony. You'll regret it." So then it takes a weird turn here. And he gets in a helicopter. And he, through his radio, he says, "There's TNT aboard this helicopter. I'm going to blow up everyone and myself. So I'm so heartbroken." So Superman, of course, shows up and he says, "There's no TNT here. And why is Eddie smiling?" So it turns out the whole thing was some elaborate ruse where I guess when Eddie wrote Lois for that column, she talked to him and he said, "Yeah, my problem is I've always wanted to be an actor, but my producer dad never thought I had the chops." So all this time, Lois and Eddie have been playing this theatrical role to prove to the father, I'm sorry, I didn't even mention, he's at the wedding, so he's the father, and to prove to his father that he can actually act. He played a lovesick fool for the past week, and the father says, "I underestimated you, son. You really have acting ability." So dumb. I'm sorry. But I gotta say, I love reading this comic. I had no idea where it was going. I was like, what? Why is Lois doing this? But once you find out what the reason is, it's like, oh my God, that's so stupid. So now we have the day Lois Lane forgot Superman. Once again, Robert Bernstein script, Chris Schaffenberger. So, Lois Lane, obviously, this whole situation, she's constantly in heartache. She's like, "Oh, why won't Superman ever propose to me?" I mean, she kind of knows why, but it's torture for her. Lucy Lane, her sister, consoles her. And, she's a stewardess. So the next day she's on a flight. There's this woman who's super afraid of flying, freaking out. There's a guy on board who says, "I'm a hypnotist. I can help." He hypnotizes her. She's totally fine. He convinces her she's not afraid of flying. So Lucy's like, "Ooh, maybe this will stop Lois from loving Superman." Next night in Metropolis, he's appearing at this theater. She says, "I made a special meeting for us with this guy." I think his name's, it's not Mojo. Maja? Oh, Majo. The great Majo. She says, "I've arranged a meeting." And it's weird. It's kind of like Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, where Lois goes along. She says, "Yeah, I don't want to be in love with Superman. It's just heartache. So hypnotize me. If this works, I'll be, happier." And it works. She seems to not have any love for Superman. She sees a Superman poster on the way home, and there's a tiny poster for Pat Boone. All she says is, "Wow, look, Pat Boone." Very dated reference there. So she sees all these things about Superman, because he's a big celebrity. And she actually not only forgot about him, she's actually kind of like, "Oh, the Superman guy seems like a big show-off. Ugh, I could never go for a guy like that." So the next day at the Daily Planet, this is where it gets really weird. Lois all of a sudden is like in love with Clark. She's like, Clark's really actually a sweet, nice, kind gentleman. And she invites him on a date to the 3D Cinerama. So I forgot to mention this. This is kind of important for the plot. The hypnotist told Lucy, says, if any shock happens to her, if she's shocked in any way, it'll erase the hypnotism, the suggestion. So Lucy throws all these pictures away of Superman that were in Lois's apartment that say like, "Hey Lois, love ya," whatever, "See ya," because that'll confuse her. She'll be like, "Wait, why do I have these pictures of Superman, addressed to me?" So they're at the 3D theater. Clark is trying to get her not to love him, so he tries to be a coward and says, "Oh, these 3D effects. Oh, I have to leave." Lois doesn't care. She says, "If you really care about someone, you can overlook their faults." Then a mugger shows up, and Clark says, "Ooh, this will really do it." He basically says, "You're on your own, Lois. I'm scared of getting shot. I'm out of here." But he slips on a banana peel, and when he's falling over, he inadvertently hits this mugger right in the face. And of course, Lois thinks, "Oh, that was brilliant how you pretended to run away so you could stop this mugger." Now, I gotta say, once again, sorry to be Mr. Nitpicky, but Superman slipping on a banana peel? I don't think that's possible. He's Superman. Where the hell would he slip on a banana peel? So, Lois is gaga over Clark. She invites him over for dinner. And I just have to explain this, guys, to you, just to show how convoluted this shit gets. She has frozen dinners in the freezer. So Superman blows on them with his super cold breath to turn them into ice so she can't thaw them out in time. So she says, "Oh, no matter, I've got some ham steaks. I guess I'll fry them up." So then Clark uses heat vision to burn the steaks. Unfortunately, the frozen dinners are right next to it. And she says, "Oh, well, the ham's burnt. That sucks. But somehow those dinners have thawed and they're ready to cook." And Clark's like, "I can't win." But luckily there's some emergency. Clark says, "I gotta go." Because, he's Superman. He's got to rescue these two fairies that are about to collide. So I guess there's a dance that night. And Clark and Lois go. Once again, there's an announcement like, "Hey, Superman, we need Superman. There's a bomb at the Metropolis terminal." Superman finds the bomb. Doesn't that look like Wally Wood here? This could be a total panel from Thunder Agents. That kind of simpler type of Wally Wood. So he takes care of the bomb. Comes back to Lois. The next day they're at the beach. There's a shark attack. People say, "There's sharks in the water." So once again, he does the old switcheroo. Turns into Superman to get rid of the sharks. Lois starts suspecting something. She says, "How come every time Superman's called, Clark disappears?" Just like she is normally. So the next day at the Daily Planet, she walks into Clark's office with a Tommy gun. And she fires at him. And she says, "Don't worry, these are just blanks. But I figured if you weren't Superman, you wouldn't duck. You wouldn't give a shit. You're invulnerable, right?" But look, Clark totally ducks. And, But then Clark says, "Look, there's 5 bullet holes in the window. Those weren't blanks. You almost killed me." And Lois is so freaked out by that. She passes out. She says, "Oh my God, I could have killed you, Clark." And then, of course, we have some dumb explanation. Clark says, "Oh, at super speed, I turned around and punched 5 holes in the window with my fingers to make it look like bullet holes. Because I knew the shock would erase the hypnotic suggestion." And it works. And once again, she's a total jerk to Clark when she wakes up. She's like, "Clark Kent, how dare you put your arms around me?" He's just trying to help her. And Clark is like, "Oh, well, back to normal." Because, he figured when Lois has a crush on Superman, it's easy to escape. You'd be like, there's a fire over in Chicago I gotta take care of. But he says, "Oh, yeah, as Clark, it's way harder to avoid Lois." I do gotta say, too, it's interesting that she's so verbally abusive to Clark Kent that, okay, Superman has this excuse, I don't want to marry you because I don't want you to be in danger from my enemies. But really? If you were Superman, you'd be like, wait, I see you at your worst. Yeah, I know you love me, so you're nice to me. But you're a horrible, mean person to anyone else who you don't like. Because she's really shitty to Clark. Like, everything she says is like an insult to him. So now we have Lois Lane's Super Lesson. Now, this story is written by Jerry Siegel and drawn by Chris Schaffenberger. So Clark and Lois are in this region of India, and they're visiting a Raja, one of the wealthiest men in the world. He instantly falls in love with Lois, and just like that caveman story, I guess he agrees to do 5 tasks that Lois gives him. Of course, she picks things that are very hard to do. She doesn't want to marry this guy. He's this kind of goofy-looking dude. And the first thing she says, oh, I've heard that there's a tiger, a rogue tiger in the Indian countryside killing your citizens. I want you to capture him with your bare hands. Just like the caveman, he's like, I'll do it. I love you that much. This guy's not a fighter. There's this whole side story where Clark Kent feigns sickness. The doctor's going to put a thermometer in his mouth. He's like, ooh, I better rub my tongue back and forth across the bottom of the thermometer so that the friction raises the mercury. So it looks like he has like 105 fever. It's like, yeah, I guess you'll be good at cunnilingus. But it's just so silly. It's all unnecessary. So, just like the caveman story, Superman Clark Kent is going to help out this guy. Almost just to like stick it to Lois. So he shows up early, knocks the tiger out, and basically whips him around so he's all woozy. And then he uses his super ventriloquism to be like, whispers, just so the Raja can hear. He says, hey, don't fear the tiger. I've weakened him. Just hit him. So the Raja punches him, knocks the tiger out. Lois, of course, is amazed. Then she says, okay, I want to ride in a flying carpet. So Superman dives under this flying carpet and flies her around. Next she says, if you love me, lift an elephant in each hand. And this is so dumb. Superman flies all the way up to the Fortress of Solitude, gets one of Brainiac's shrinking rays, a replica, shrinks 2 elephants down to like handheld size so the Raja can hold 2 elephants in each hand. Now, you'd think Lois Lane is a great reporter. I know she's got this whole thing going on with the Raja, but this is one of the greatest scientific discoveries of, a century. Oh my God, there's these elephants that are like 6 inches high. But she just thinks to herself, perhaps I got these amazing creatures from some strange valley lost in time. That time forgot. End of story. Does it feel like it's worthy to write a dispatch to the Daily Planet and report on this amazing scientific discovery? So dumb. So her next request is, I want you to lose 100 pounds overnight. And then this is what a piece of shit Lois is. There's a banquet that night, a dinner. And, of course, the Raja is just like eating a radish, trying to lose, because he has to lose weight. She's gorging on all this food, this banquet. And she's like, oh, what a pity you're dieting, Raja, and can't enjoy this delicious food. She's such a turd. So the next day he works out, goes into one of those little sweating boxes. Of course, he loses like 1 pound. So then Superman shows up and says, hey guys, I was on my way to the moon for a research trip. You want to come with me? So he puts him in this little bubble and he gives the Raja a little box, a wrapped box. They get to the surface of the moon and then he says, hey Raja, open the box. It's a weight scale. He steps on the weight scale and of course it's the moon with much less gravity, so he only weighs 62 pounds. So now Lois is like, Superman, you're helping this guy. What the hell's going on here? So then her last request, she says, look at that ship coming into port. I want you to have 2 whales escorted into the dock. She knows that Superman couldn't do something like that. You know, he's good at everything, but that's beyond his purview. And all of a sudden, these 2 whales show up and do just that. They escort the ship to the dock. And she says, you couldn't have done this, Superman. And he thinks to himself, but Lori Lamaris, my mermaid friend, can. So I guess she's telepathic, so he sent a mental message to her. Once again, Lori Lamaris is like a queen of Atlantis, I think, or something. I'm sure she's better things to do than help you do this cruel trick on Lois. But whatever, she drops what she's doing and does this. So I love this idea, I gotta say. So, back at the palace, Lois says, you win, Raja, I'll marry you. And Raja says, I've changed my mind. I don't want to marry a demanding female like you, Lois. You're headstrong, unpredictable. You'd probably organize my 50 wives into a union and go on strike. And of course, Lois is like, 50 wives, gulp. I like how Superman just checks out. He's like, see you later. This is awkward. And then, of course, Clark shows up. And I love this. I don't think this has ever happened in a Clark Lois type comic. He's laughing at her, totally rubbing it in. He's like, look at you. He says, I'm going to tell Perry White there's going to be an article in the Daily Planet. And look how cross Lois is. She's like, if you tell anyone, I'll never speak to you again. I got to say, Chris Schaffenberger draws Lois way more attractive than Chris Wan does, too. She's kind of hot for, this simple kind of art. We have another article, The Lowdown on Lois. And now we have the last story. It's the wedding of Lois and Superman. Once again, Robert Bernstein writing, Kurt Schaffenberger. So Lois wants to take a vacation. Apparently, the small town where she grew up, Pittsdale, she wants to return because the newspaper there, the little small town paper that she, honed her skills on when she was young, they're having their 100th anniversary. And she wants to be there. She just wants to see her parents. Her sister Lucy gets her a flight because, she's a stewardess. But then she says, oh, my God, there's this fog. All the airplanes have been grounded. So Clark hears this. He turns into Superman and says, hey, Lois, I got nothing to do. What's up? And she says, oh, my God, would you fly me to Pittsdale? So, of course, he does. They get there. And it's kind of weird, like how blatant Lois is. She actually says, I can't even look at another man because I'm madly in love with you. And she totally tells him all the time. And Superman just ignores her. I mean, this time he has a good excuse because he sees a tractor out of control. The tractor's headed for this ravine, this cliff. Superman rescues the guy. Turns out the old man on the tractor is Lois's father. So he invites him to dinner. In fact, he invites him to stay all weekend. And he obviously is just like, oh, this would be a great son-in-law. The next day, Superman helps him clear all these trees just with his bare hands. He chops these tree trunks off that, that would have been like a month labor for the father. He's like, oh my God, I got to get this guy as a son-in-law. This would be so handy. Look at this Superman drawing here. I gotta say, I don't know who this looks like, but it's definitely a good-looking Superman compared to Kurt Swan. And once again, I'm sorry, Kurt Swan fans. I know there's a lot of you out there, but compared to Chris Schaffenberger, you're not worthy to fill his inkwell. So, he basically goes to Clark's guest room and says, Superman, he says, Superman, come on. Haven't you thought about marrying my daughter? You'd be a great husband. I would love to have you as a son-in-law. And Superman starts to say, listen, Mr. Lane, Lois is a wonderful girl. She'd make a fine wife. And this little gossipy busybody townsperson, this old lady, she hears it. And she misconstrues what he's saying. Because, of course, after she leaves, Superman continues to say, she'd always be in danger. I can't marry anyone. I'm married to my work. I have to save the world all the time. It wouldn't be fair to any woman. So this gossipy lady gets on the phone, tells everyone in town. It gets to the newspaper. And all of a sudden, the newspaper comes out, a special edition. Superman to wed Lois Lane this Sunday. So even Lois Lane isn't happy about this because she's like, I don't want to force Superman to marry me. Everyone's thrilled. A marching band comes to their house with a sign saying, congratulations. Everyone's telling Lois, oh, this is so great. And Lois is just as distressed as Superman. She's like, Superman, I don't want our marriage to be this way. You got to stop this somehow. Superman keeps saying, over the next few days, he says, yeah, I got an idea. I'll take care of this. Okay, exhibit whatever. Z? And what a turd Lois is. So later, as one of Lois's childhood sweethearts drops in, this guy Hector. Look at him, he's kind of a weird looking, I don't know, he looks like a fucking elf or something. He says, now that you're getting married, Lois, I thought I'd return your love letters as a wedding gift. Maybe you'd want to show them to your husband. Fucking weird right there. What? Why would anyone want that? And then Lois, right in front of him, looks over to Clark, Superman, and says, psst, really, Superman, Hector used to be good looking. As for those letters I wrote him, I'd give anything to see them destroyed. So she's terrible. I hate Lois Lane. So Superman gets in on the act, uses his heat vision, and burns the letters right in front of Hector. Hector obviously looks devastated. He says, you're burning them. All those beautiful words of love. And look at Lois just smiling as poor Hector is just crushed. And look at her, she's smiling and making a little joke about it. So, it gets closer and closer to the wedding, and Lois is getting more distressed. She's like, Superman says he has some plan. It's almost the wedding. I like how Mr. Lane, the father, he offers Superman a dowry of 4 cows and 6 pigs. So it's the day of the wedding. Lois is in her dress. And the whole thing is, Superman says, Lois, I got to be careful about this. I don't want you to be humiliated, in front of your parents, in front of the town. I can't just fly off. They'll think you were jilted at the altar. I've got to figure out an elegant way to extricate ourselves from this situation. So Lois is being led down the aisle by her father. She's obviously thinking, what the fuck is this plan? It's almost too late. In like 2 minutes, we're going to be married. And all of a sudden, it's like 5 minutes until 6. Guys, I should have mentioned this. This is a major plot point. The whole time, Superman, when he was offered to hang out with them, he said, okay, but at 6 p.m. Sunday, I have got to be back at the Fortress of Solitude because there's a planetary alignment that I have to photograph. Sounds ridiculous. He's fucking Superman. I don't know. But I have to go. So it's 5 minutes to 6. And then all of a sudden, these fighter planes, these jets from the local airbase start buzzing this, the wedding. And nobody can hear the preacher over the noise. The father yells at them, stop it, you fools, you're interfering with the wedding. But of course, this is all a brilliant plan. And I'm obviously being sarcastic. There's nothing brilliant about this plan. It's stupid as fuck. So Lucy Lane, who came with them to Pittsville, she's, an stewardess, so she's, I guess, has pull with the local air base, which seems a little silly too. And he called her up and said, hey, make these jet fighters or, these Air Force planes buzz the wedding so it can continue. So at the stroke of 6, Superman lifts up Lois and says, sorry, time to leave, Pa. I gotta go to Metropolis and then to the Fortress of Solitude, like I said. He says, but what about the wedding? When will you return? Maybe my next vacation, Pa, says Lois. Put the old shoes in rice and cold storage till then. Thanks for everything. And Superman says, they may be a little confused, but at least we didn't disgrace them. Are you fucking kidding me? Like, that would work. So, okay, I have to do this thing at 6 p.m. Sunday, but we'll never return to get married. I think her mother and father would be like, okay, how long are you at the Fortress of Solitude? I'm sure you'll come right back and marry our daughter. Or if you don't, it's just as disgraceful if you flew off during the ceremony. This is the dumbest ending I've ever seen. And it totally works, apparently. Apparently, nobody questions this, that they never returned to get married. Lois thinks to herself very sadly. She says, well, let's hope we will return one day when Superman really wants to marry me, and it won't be some ruse. So sad and pathetic. So, that's it. Other than this kind of well-drawn ad for a G.I. Joe doll. I don't know who this is. The internet didn't tell me. There you go, guys. Superman's girlfriend Lois Lane, number 68. And I hope you didn't mind how drunk I was during this episode. But it's not the booze talking. I'd be just as infuriated by this comic as I would if I was sober. But I gotta say, it's still fun as fuck reading these. Because you never know what's gonna happen. The most ludicrous things happen that you could ever imagine. You could never imagine, I'm sorry. You can't imagine what they're gonna do in any story. It's nuts. But I recommend this highly. All these Lois Lanes are great. Even though I do not like Lois Lane, after reading The City Page Giant, like, she's not a good person. And I don't know why Superman even entertains the notion that she's the love of his life. And yet he can't marry her because he doesn't want to endanger her. Of course, he did end up marrying her. And the knots, the teens. And it worked out just fine. I still don't understand why Clark can't marry Lois. And then nobody would know that she's Superman's wife. He could say, hey, I'm Superman. And let's get married. And she'd be totally fine. I don't know if they ever talked about that. But the whole thing is ludicrous. This whole relationship is... I don't know why they call her Superman's girlfriend. She's not his girlfriend at all. They've never kissed. They go on little dates like pals do. They go to a movie. Maybe he'll hold her hand. It's just crazy. So, I should go. My blood pressure's up. I need to take my medicine. This comic has really riled me up. But I hope you guys like watching this tonight. It was. I hope you had as much fun as I did reading it. I know I sounded angry and peeved, which I am, but it's still fun as hell. These crazy Mort Weisinger edited comics. Thanks for watching. Hopefully, I'll see you next time here at the Herculespetix Academy of Comic Book Studies.